And hello, everybody, and welcome to this Houston County Political Forum brought to you by the Robbins Regional Chamber. Today's forum is in a virtual format, but you will be hearing from candidates over the next 90 minutes for Houston County District Attorney, State Representative District 147, and State Senate District 20. I'm Frank Malloy, news anchor with 13 WMAZ, and it's only fitting that this comes on the very first day of early voting, which runs now through June 5th and leads up to Election Day on June 9th. I'm very pleased to have with us tonight April Bragg. She is the president and CEO of the Robbins Regional Chamber, and she will now say a few words before we get started. April.
Thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure to have you with us. I would like to take a brief moment to thank our Chamber Board of Directors and specifically our Governmental Affairs Committee for their leadership and support of the Chamber's advocacy efforts. As a non-for-profit member organization, the Robbins Regional Chamber is a bridge between businesses, military organizations, and residents together to bring them through effective programs that strengthen the Robbins region's economic vitality, business success, job creation, and quality of life. As such, the Chamber is committed to advocating for business-friendly regulations and policies, an attractive business climate, fiscal integrity, healthy infrastructure, a talent-rich workforce, innovation, ethical business dealings, inclusivity, and transparency. We've shared a long history with 13 WMAZ hosting these candidate forums, and Frank, it is always a pleasure to have you. You've been at every single one, and so we just want to thank you for your support, and we're very excited for you guys pivoting to this virtual platform with us this year.
It's always my pleasure. Thanks very much, April. It's very important as we count down to Election Day, another very important election. Now, the format tonight, this is a political forum. It's not a debate. That means there will be no rebuttals. There will be opening statements. Then the candidates will each answer every question, and then we'll finish with closing statements. We're ready to get started right now. And our first race we'll be presenting is for Houston County District Attorney, where the candidates are, in alphabetical order, Arthur Kreeke and George Hartwig. Welcome both, Mr. Hartwig and Mr. Kreeke. Thanks very much for taking time to be with us. We appreciate that. And if you're ready to go, we are ready to go. We will start with opening statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes. We'll go in alphabetical order, which means, Mr. Kreeke, you will start first.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to thank the Robbins Regional Chamber for hosting this and WMAZ for broadcasting this on internet. My name is Arthur Kreeke. I am a candidate for Houston County District Attorney. I am a lifelong resident of Houston County. I know Houston County is a great place to live, to raise your children, and I like to keep it that way. That is why I raise my children and they go to school here. There are several issues which the Houston County faces in the upcoming district attorney's election. It's about the backlog, the cause of the backlog. There are in excess of 1,500 cases dating all the way back to 2001. Of particular concern are 127 cases still pending from 2017, approximately 370 cases still pending from 2018, and these are only indicted cases. There are issues concerning victims' assistance, the rights of victims in having an unreasonable delay in the prosecution of their cases, certainly a backlog of these cases where cases are pending for so long, and lack of communication with these victims is an issue. The third issue in talking to law enforcement is simply their lack of communication with the district attorney's office concerning cases, disposition of cases, preparation of cases. The list goes on and on. There has to be a realization that not every issue is resolved by email or a text. At some point, you have to go down to the office and talk to them face to face. They certainly deserve it. They deserve our support. They deserve to know what is going on with their cases. The last issue has to do with the management of the district attorney's office. It is clear that based on the backlog, based on the complaints from law enforcement, based on the complaints from victims about the lack of communication, that these issues need to be resolved.
All right, Mr. Kreeke, thanks very much. Mr. Hartwig, you now have your opening statement. 2 minutes, please.
Good evening, Frank, and I want to thank you and April for moderating this event tonight. Thank you for hosting this forum. For the last 9.5 years, it's been my honor and privilege to serve as a district attorney of Houston County. Prior to that, I was in the DA's office for 9 years as an assistant DA, and prior to that was a law enforcement officer. I know full well what this community wants with regard to a district attorney's office. And district attorney's office tries cases, it goes after the most serious violent criminals that endanger our community. And we have done that. We have done that successfully. I'm not, my opponent gets his numbers from, but we'll get into that later. It has been my priority since taking office to go after not only the serious violent criminal, but also to go after and seek justice on old cold cases where people had been murdered in this county. People have committed rapes. People have committed some of the most heinous violent crimes that there are, and no one had ever been charged and prosecuted with those crimes. And my office, under my leadership, has gone back and has worked with law enforcement to not only review and revive those old cases, but to prosecute and prosecute successfully those old cases. And we have prosecuted cases from the 80s, the 90s, cases that had not been charged or prosecuted before I took office. We communicate with law enforcement. We communicate with victims. We do a good job keeping this community safe. That is my priority. That is my goal. And that is what I have done as district attorney.
Mr. Hartwig, thanks very much. We will now go to the question and answer portion of the forum. April Bragg will be asking the questions. Again, both candidates will get a chance to respond. First question, first response will go to Mr. Hartwig. April.
Mr. Hartwig, what do you believe is the role of the district attorney in the criminal justice system?
Well, the two main things that I just alluded to in my opening remarks are, one, seeking justice for victims, seeking a fair and appropriate amount of justice in each and every case. And then secondly, keeping our community safe. We decide which cases to prosecute, which cases to give priority to. And again, as your district attorney, my priority has been on the serious violent criminals, the folks that rob convenience stores, the folks that shoot other people, the folks that commit murder, the folks that commit rape. And we have prioritized those cases, and we have done a good job prosecuting those cases. Under my leadership as district attorney, we have gotten 53 total life sentences in the last 9.5 years. 22 of those life sentences have been life without the possibility of parole. That is just in Houston County. That shows the commitment we have to prosecuting and putting away violent criminals.
All right, same question. Mr. Creek, you now have 1 minute to respond, please.
Thank you. The role of the district attorney, like all prosecutors, as defined by the Supreme Court of Georgia, is to seek justice. It does not mean you go out of your way to persecute someone. The priority is not only just to seek it in cases of violent offenses, and you seek, obviously you always seek the safety of the community, but also you have to go to look at the thefts that are occurring, the burglaries that are occurring. I can think of nothing worse than an individual short of being murdered where somebody goes into their house and steals away their safety and security, and that those cases need to be prosecuted more. The thefts, that's why you had people writing into local newspapers about Mr. Hartwig not caring about what's happening to their cases and what's not happening as far as prosecution in their cases.
All right, second question. April will give the question. Mr. Creaky, you will go first this time. 1 minute to answer, please.
What do you think are the biggest obstacles in justice for our county?
I think the biggest obstacles right now in prosecuting the cases and in getting justice to the people who want it, deserve it, and need it is just the lack of prosecution in the cases that are going on. There is no reason why a case should sit for 2-3 years in the district attorney's office waiting to be indicted or waiting for someone to do something to pick up the phone and call them. As I indicated, there are at least 127 cases that were indicted in 2017. That does not mean that the cases are from 2017. Most of these cases have 4-year statute of limitations. So a case indicted in 2017 can be as early or as old as 2013. That is certainly one of the biggest, or not necessarily, or probably the biggest obstacle in the prosecution of justice in this case, in this county.
Mr. Hartwig, 1 minute to respond to this question, please.
Well, one of the biggest obstacles to justice is us being able to get cases to trial. The case that the thing my opponent just referred to about somebody writing a letter to the editor was one of his supporters. That is a big theft case from a medical practice. That case has been pending for 3 years. It's been indicted, it's been arraigned, and it is ready for trial. We don't set trial calendars, the court does. And so that case may sit until the judge tells us it's ready to go to trial. We have no mechanism to move that case forward to trial. The court is responsible for that. The other problem we have is, and part of this is on our legislature, is that with criminal justice reform that's taken place over the last several years, penalties have been reduced to levels where it's very difficult to get people to come in and plead guilty to crimes like they used to. And so now a lot more people want trials, and we just can't get the case to do trial.
All right, we now move on to question number 3 from April Bragg. And Mr. Hartwig, you will respond first this time. 1 minute, please.
You mentioned criminal justice reform. As a DA, what role would you play in the area of criminal justice reform?
Well, I was actually appointed by Governor Nathan Deal to serve on the Council for Criminal Justice Reform, so I have firsthand knowledge of some of the things that took place in that area. And again, as I just alluded to, one of the problems is that when you take certain crimes, and I'll use drug cases as an example, and people can get caught with cocaine or methamphetamine, the penalty on that used to be 1 to 15 years. And so when you made a plea offer to somebody, and most of our cases are resolved by plea offers and guilty pleas, when you made a plea offer, there was some incentive for that person to come in and plead guilty because the crime carried a 15-year sentence. Well, our legislature reduced possession of those drugs to 3 years as a max for smaller amounts. Well, if the maximum person can get is 3 years, there's not a whole lot of incentive there to come in and plead guilty. You hold out for a trial, and again, it just adds to the number of cases that have to go to trial.
Thank you. Mr. Creaky, 1 minute to respond to the same question.
On it interesting that my opponent said he was appointed by Governor Nathan Deal to be part of the criminal justice reform, and then he wants to turn around and complain about that very act of reform that he was part and parcel of. I think criminal justice reform is something that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, what it is that the priorities of our society is, what it is society as a whole wants to accomplish. Many people that I speak to, they talk about how the slowness of the criminal justice system, some of them talk about the lack of resources available to prosecutors, but in this day and age, really it's a question of what is the society we would like to see accomplished in regards to penalties for burglary, penalties for drug offenses, and everything else that'll go along this line.
All right, we now move on to our next question, question number 4 from April. Mr. Creaky, you will go first with your answer this time.
Mr. Creaky, what, if anything, can be done to speed up the justice process for victims while ensuring the rights of defendants are protected?
Well, it's not necessarily that there's a conflict between the two. Really, what needs to be done in this particular county is that as cases are coming in, as far as the warrants are concerned, we need to go back and do something that one of Mr. Hartwig's opponents used to do, and that is you have an experienced prosecutor look at the warrant. People need to talk to the victim about what it is they want to see about their case. It needs to be indicted for the most part within 90 days. Obviously, exceptions for cases that may be complicated and so forth. Once you get them indicted, then you start the arraignment, and then you start working and get them on the trial calendar. It's really just a question of prosecuting in a timely fashion. Every defendant has a right to a speedy trial. Every victim has a right to a case to be disposed of without unreasonable delay. These things aren't necessarily in conflict. But that is the general process.
All right, Mr. Hartwig, your chance now to answer that question. 1 minute for your response, please.
Well, the part of the problem here is again that the district attorney's office does not set the trial calendars. So I don't select 100 or 150 cases and tell the judge, these are the cases we want to try. The court picks the cases that go on the trial calendars. So if the court doesn't pick a case and put it on a trial calendar, there is no mechanism for us as prosecutors to move that case forward. Once we've done everything we can do on the case, which is to indict it, get the defendant arraigned, particularly if that defendant's out on bond, that case is going to sit until the court puts it on a calendar. Unlike the defendant, who has a right to file for a speedy trial, and they can file a motion and demand that, the state has no such comparable right. So I, as the prosecutor, cannot file a motion with the court and say, on behalf of my victim, I am demanding a speedy trial, judge, and get a case to trial quicker. I don't have that mechanism.
All right, thank you. We continue to move along here with our forum for Houston County District Attorney. Next question, April. Mr. Hartwig will answer first.
Thank you, Frank. In your opinion, what should be done to minimize pretrial incarceration rates?
Well, I can tell you that the pretrial incarceration rates are not all that high. The people that are generally incarcerated pretrial need to be incarcerated prior to their trial. When folks are in jail and they are not given a bond, or they're given a high bond and can't make it, generally the charges they're in on are very serious. They pose a danger to our community. They have lengthy records and are risk to reoffend and commit new felony offenses. And so we don't keep a lot of people locked up pre-trial unless there's a good reason for it. I know particularly now with the COVID, there's very few people being locked up waiting for trials that don't really need to be in there. But the dangerous, violent criminals, they need to be locked up pre-trial, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that they stay that way.
All right, Mr. Creepy, same question, 1 minute for your response, please.
The last time I checked, there were approximately 326 people currently sitting in the Houston County Jail. The reality is when people come up and they have bonds, they have histories of 120, 130 pages long. Those individuals have multiple convictions. They don't really need to be released at all. And in fact, the people, as my opponent says, probably the only time we're going to agree on anything is people who are violent, have violent histories. They do not need to be released. And quite frankly, it's just a situation where every case is different. Every case that people look at, and you argue the bond situation.
All right, we move on now to our next question. Mr. Creaky, you will respond first this time. Again, where responses are 1 minute.
Transparency and staff morale are key factors in managing a successful workplace. How will you ensure high levels of both in the DA's office?
Well, I think transparency can be accomplished by something that used to be done, and that is publish the amount on the internet of how many cases are currently pending within the district attorney's office. Mr. Hartwig's predecessor used to do that all the time, and you could just simply look up and find out what is going on with the district attorney's office. There also was no issue about having people call up and getting a good response or talking to the prosecutor in that particular case. A return phone call goes a long, long way. As far as the morale within the office, it's about keeping communications open, keeping your door open with your individual prosecutors and staff. It is about making certain everyone is treated fairly and equitably in their office, and that there is no partisanship or unfairness in treating individuals.
Mr. Hartwig, you have 1 minute to respond to the question.
Well, when it comes to transparency, the district attorney's office is very closely covered by the local media, as you are aware. Indictments, every time we have grand jury, every other week, the indictments in cases that we indict are published in the House-Home Journal. Most trials that we cover are covered by Macon Telegraph, House-Home Journal, WMAZ. Our courtrooms are public, Anybody that wants to come down and see on any given day what we do in the district attorney's office, I invite them to come down. They're welcome to sit in court and see us do our jobs on a daily basis. When it comes to office morale, one of the biggest factors is that prosecutors are underpaid. I've had 2 assistant district attorneys leave our office recently. Both of them said they were leaving for higher paying positions. Our county paid prosecutors have not been given step or merit raises in about 10 years. And it's hard to keep quality people, and that does have a negative effect on morale.
All right, our next question will be a 2-part question, April, and Mr. Hartwig will respond first.
Thank you, Frank. Mr. Hartwig, how would you describe the relationship between the DA's office and law enforcement? If there is a need for improvement, why? And what will you do as district attorney to support a healthy relationship there?
Well, I think the relationship between the district attorney's office and law enforcement is very good. I can tell you what I have done as district attorney to build and strengthen the relationships with law enforcement. And one of those is there is lots of communication. This notion that there's no communication between my office and law enforcement is apparently a figment of my opponent's imagination. About every law enforcement officer in this county has my cell phone number. My cell phone rings virtually around the clock when we have major violent crimes in this county, which again is my priority. I routinely go to the crime scene. I get called in the morning, go out. We have with law enforcement all night long, around the clock, on violent, serious crimes that have taken place in this county. And I can give you examples of that. The Sam Poss murder in Perry a couple of years ago. I was called by Perry PD. I went out and I worked out all night long. I worked with Perry PD on that case. So law enforcement knows they can call me. I'm a former law enforcement officer. I do get those calls. I get them around the clock. And I think that's what you have to do, is be available. And when law enforcement calls, you can't pass the buck. You've got to get in the car and go out, no matter what time of the day or night it is. And I do that.
Because of the length of this question, you do have 2 minutes to respond, Mr. Creaky, just like Mr. Hartwig had 2 minutes to answer too. So,
Thank you. I would suggest that if someone wants to find out about what the relationship is between the district attorney's office and a law enforcement agency or particular officers, go talk to them. I prosecuted over 1,300 cases last year. My communication with the law enforcement agency is excellent. I talk to them over the phone, but more than that, and this is what their beef is that no one from the district attorney's office wants to attend to return their calls. It's not about calling up my opponent and saying, can you go to so-and-so area for crime? It's all about what's going on with the case. Why did you dismiss this case? They understand plea bargaining. They understand not every case is going to be prosecutable necessarily. They understand what is happening or what's going on. What the issue is that when it comes time to try a case, they can't get anyone to return their calls. That is a problem with the district attorney, not with individual prosecutors. It's about looking at the caseload and deciding what is happening. The best way to improve this relationship and to make it healthy is to take the time, not just my opponent, but the individual prosecutors, to talk to the officers. That's all they ask. When a case is dismissed, tell them what they did wrong. They want to know. If there's a way to improve a case or improve a prosecution, they want to know. It requires something more than an email. It requires something more than a text message. It requires contact. It means something more than when they go down or someone goes down to fill up their county car, the county gas, they come in and say, hey, how you doing? It means communication, plain and simple.
all right, we have now come to the closing statements portion of our political forum tonight. For closing statements, we'll go in reverse order of opening statements, which means, Mr. Hartwig, you will go first, and you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, again, it's been an honor and privilege to serve as the district attorney of this county. I've done my very best to prosecute crime and to have a good staff and to do what we keep this county safe, and I will continue to do that. I look forward to serving as the district attorney of this county for the next 4 years, and I ask you for your vote. I find it very interesting that My opponent seems to know an awful lot about the issues and the problems within the district attorney's office, even though he has never spent one single day in the DA's office prosecuting felony cases. He really has not talked 1 second about his qualifications, his experience, why he is even qualified to be the district attorney of this county. And the reason he won't talk about it is because he doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have the qualifications. He's never done the job. He frankly has no clue what the job entails. And I am the guy for the job, and I'm asking you to vote for me and keep me in office. Thank you.
We will finish up with closing statements. Mr. Krikke, 1 minute for your final remarks.
Thank you. I have been a prosecutor for over 20 years. I started prosecuting in 1998. I became the Chief Assistant Solicitor General in 1999. I prosecuted over 1,300 cases last year. I have dealt with cases involving child molestation, sexual battery, DUI, theft by shoplifting, theft by receiving. I have prosecuted law enforcement, doctors, lawyers, people of every stripe and every thought you can think of. If Mr. Hurt, my opponent, wants to talk about qualifications, what he wants to say is that these things that I prosecute bear no relations. Take the time. What's the difference between felony theft by shoplifting and felony or misdemeanor theft by shoplifting? A penny. Or some of these cases, it's just a question of the amount of money that's involved or the age that's involved. But the thing is, these questions and these problems that face the district attorney's office has nothing to do with experience.
All right, George Hartwig, Arthur Krikke, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking time tonight to be with us for this Houston County Political Forum District Attorney's Race. April and I are going to now take a brief break, very brief, and then we're going to bring on the candidates for State Representative District 147. That would be the incumbent Heath Clark and the challenger Miranda Britt. So please continue staying with us.